Halloween, the most spooky and mystical holiday out there. And what better way to celebrate the greatness of Halloween than to delve in the chaotic and alien abyss of the Call of Cthulhu universe? So with that, in order to celebrate Halloween, I'm going to be delving into a solo adventure for Call of Cthulhu's 7th edition tabletop role-playing game. This particular one is titled Alone Against the Tide from the Mystotonic Repository, written by Nicholas Johnson. In this adventure, I will be playing as a professor by the name of Elijah Bancroft as he explores and navigates his way through all of the alien horrors and madness-inducing chaos in the Call of Cthulhu world. So sit back and enjoy. Alone Against the Tide, a Call of Cthulhu 7th edition solo adventure, written by Nicholas Johnson. Chapter 1. Our story begins in the 1920s, in the lakeside resort town of Esbury, Massachusetts. The sun sinks low along the horizon as you board the ferry headed across the lake to Esbury. As you step foot on the boat, the ferryman greets you with a wide smile and a half-hearted wave. He stands by the gangplank as you pass, welcoming the other passengers as he removes his cap to scratch at his balding head. His pudgy figure fills his well-worn suit awkwardly, but he seems a rather pleasant sort. Leaving the man behind you, you take a seat towards the prow, eyes fixed on your destination. You settle into your seat with your thin briefcase resting on your lap, and you notice that the rest of the passengers are likewise getting comfortable for the short trip across. Glancing around, you catch sight of the ferryman entering the cabin. As you sit patiently and wait for the engine to come to life, you listen to the sounds of idle chatter around you. You look out across the water and notice a thin fog beginning to form over the surface of the water as the temperature drops with the approaching night. After a few minutes, you hear the engine sputter into action and feel the ferry lurch forward to make its journey. The conversations around you continue on as the ferryman joins you all on deck. You can't but overhear most of the talk. Though it is surprisingly banal, there are almost a dozen passengers on the ferry, and most of them are simply looking to spend their money during the weekend in Esbury to enjoy the various shops and leisure activities of the lakeside town. Many of the passengers seem to come for money, as is common in Esbury. You notice a strange look from one of the women in the group. She has brown hair and eyes, and a full figure, and she seems to be looking you over, admiring your features. Clearly she finds something in you that she likes. Perhaps it is your looks, or a glint of intelligence in your eyes. She gives you a sly wink before turning back to her companions. You likewise turn your attention back to the rest of the passengers. Sitting apart from the general crowd are two men in dark, well-tailored suits. They whisper quietly to each other and have unamused expressions on their faces, as if they don't seem pleased to be here. Perhaps they are on business. Noticing that you are sitting alone, the ferryman approaches you and stands over you with his characteristic smile, and you notice he is missing a tooth in his upper left corner of his mouth. His eyes are bright, and they light upon you. "Good afternoon. You look a bit lonely there. What brings you to Esbury?" "Well, you see, I work for the Mystotonic University, and a colleague of mine passed away recently in Esbury, and I've been sent to recover his work and bring it back to the university." "You must mean that Professor Harris fella. Real shame what happened to him. He always seemed like such a nice man. Officer Powell says they're still cleaning up after the mess at the professor's place, but some of the more valuable bits will probably be at the estate sale tonight. If you're really wanting at it..." The man looks down at his hands for a moment, and then back at you as he extends one your way. "Anyway, I'm Lance Stanford. Pleased to meet you. But I wish they were under better circumstances, eh?" "Likewise, but it is a pleasure to meet you, Lance. Tell me a little bit about yourself." "Well, I lived in Esbury for years, since back before the rich folk found the place and turned it into their little vacation spot. My father owned the ferry to and from the town, and he passed it on to me when he got too old to do it himself anymore. I love it here. I can't imagine living anywhere else. The lake is so clear and clean. I guess that's why we get so many visitors here. This place has definitely grown since I was younger. Sometimes I miss the way things were before, but I love Asbury. All the same even now. You like it here too. Lance winks at you. You exchange a few more pleasantries with Lance before he goes off to finish guiding the boat into port. You pass the time in casual conversation with the other passengers and in observing the scenery. You note the tall pines and the sloping hills on the lakeside towards Asbury. These features and the small town are just visible through the growing mist, but you squint enough to make them out to your satisfaction. In time, you arrive on the pier at Asbury, grateful to be off the water. You take your first steps onto the pier with the rest of the passengers of the ferry, trying to get your land legs once again. The passengers are still chatting casually as they walk off to their destinations. You note one last little flirty wink from the full-figured woman as she struts along, confidently behind the women accompanying her. And you feel the two dark-suited men push past you at a brisk pace, nudging you out of their way. Lance gives you one last wave and a smile as he begins to tend to his old rust-stained boat that is his pride and joy. The last light of the sun is fading fast over you, and the fog is growing thick on the water now. The night is still young, but you would rather not be wandering around in the dark and fog of a town you are unfamiliar with. Taking in your surroundings, you see a sizable crowd jockeying for the entrance into a lavish, modern-looking building along the lakeside. A folding sign sits out in front, illuminated by the lantern. The words, "Estate Sale Tonight," are written in large, bold letters. You make your way toward the estate sale, pushing into the crowd. Judging by the number of people packing into the dance hall, this seems to be quite the event. Most of the people here are well dressed, and there is lots of jewelry and designer clothing to be seen on the guests. You see a broad-shouldered man in a policeman's uniform standing by the door. He has a nightstick at his side and a scarred yet clean-shaven face. His brow is furrowed in a serious expression, and he watches the commotion through narrow eyes. As you mingle through the crowd of academics and collectors, you notice a few other faces that stand out in the crowd. Most immediately, you spot a man in orange flowing robes with dusky skin. He seems more than a little out of place, and has garnered some odd looks from the other guests. Glancing around further, you happen to notice the two dark-suited gentlemen from earlier, standing in a corner toward the front of the room, talking to a young, dark-haired man in a dated yet elegant long coat. His face has rather sharp features, and he is of a slight build, with a thin wisp of a mustache hanging beneath his nose. And most prominently, there is a rather attractive young woman standing on stage at the front of the room with a bespectacled old man. Long black hair cascades down her shoulders, accentuating her pale features and complementing her black formal dress. Occasionally, she and the older gentleman peek at objects that are beneath white sheets, waiting to be displayed. You turn around and backtrack towards the entrance of the ballroom. Something about the officer by the door catches your attention and holds it. He gives off a commanding presence, and his eyes bore into you intensely as you make your way towards him. As you move within earshot, he rests his hand on his nightstick and clears his throat. "I really hope there isn't any sort of problem, citizen. I wouldn't want to see anyone getting hurt tonight." His hand does not move from his nightstick. For an officer of the law, this man possesses a rather thuggish disposition. He seems to be looking for a fight, and from the scars on his face, you can tell he's been in many. With his size, he does cut a rather intimidating figure. Still, the use of thinly veiled threats as an introduction is somewhat unnerving, and certainly not proper behavior for a moral and ethical man. It is probably best not to provoke this man, and it would be wise to avoid him as much as possible. After parting ways with the less than friendly officer, you approach the strange man in orange. His orange robes are a stark contrast to the fine suits and dresses of the New England financial elite. This man seems well-traveled and wary, and his clothes are clearly a carryover from a distant land. His skin is dark, which further causes him to stand out. You open your mouth as if to speak, and find him staring intensely at you. You recognize the man's style of dress to be that of a Buddhist monk. You stop yourself from speaking and bow a customary greeting, to which the monk smiles and returns the gesture, before speaking in heavily accented but fluent English. "It is good to see one here with such respect for our customs. I am Banu." His expression turns to a frown as he makes a sweeping gesture to the rest of the room. The rest here seem to only seek to profit from my culture. Selling the items of my ancestors is most shameful. I can't help but agree, but it does seem like a lot of trouble and effort to come such a long way just to witness such behavior. I have come with what money my temple can gather, so that I might save a certain few of the artifacts, ones that a Professor Harris stole from my temple in Sarnarth when he came to visit some years ago. The monk seems troubled and becomes silent. He bows a farewell, and you take the cue to leave. Parting ways from the monk, you make your way to the stage, navigating the dance hall and around the many guests. Your eyes lock firmly on the woman, and hers rise to meet yours as she looks up from peeking at one of the objects on stage. She stops what she is doing as you approach. A smile appears on her lips, and she notices that she has caught your eye. Her left hand rests on her hip as you come to stand at the foot of the stage. The old man behind her continues his inspections, unaware or uncaring that you have come to distract them. The woman leans over the edge of the stage and down to you. You can see her makeup has been painstakingly applied, despite her status as a recent widow. You clear your throat as you meet her gaze and promptly introduce yourself. I'm Professor Bancroft. I was a colleague of your husband's at the university. I'm so sorry for your loss. She extends her hand to you formally. Well, aren't you a new face in town? She teases playfully. We get those quite a bit here. No doubt you planned a bit on some of my late husband's things. Good for both of us, I say. Just be sure to give a good price for little old me, alright? She winks slyly at you. You realize now would be a good time to get some more info from the woman, who might be the most well-informed regarding your interests. She certainly seems like the flirty sort, and would probably respond well to the same. You take her hand in yours and bring it to your lips, keeping eye contact with her as you do so. She giggles lightly, and her smile grows wider as she regards you with interest. My, aren't you a charmer? If I weren't a widow, I'd be thrilled. But still I must mourn my husband. You understand. He was a stuffy old goat and obsessed with his studies. I have no problem selling his things, mind you. But that's because I need the money. You understand. A girl like me gets used to a certain standard of living after all. But I can't very well go tramping after the first suitor who comes to replace him, no matter how fetching. She winks at you once again and rests her hand on your arm and lowers her voice to a whisper. But perhaps you could join me for a drink later? I have a little bit set aside for good company. I won't tell if you don't. She seals the conversation with a final wink and breaks off her touch, turning back to the stage and the artifacts. The murmuring of the crowd dies down, and people begin to crowd around the stage as Amelia and the older gentleman on stage call everyone to attention. The widow strides confidently to the front of the stage where the lights are centered. She flashes a broad smile for the crowd and begins to speak. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you could all make it tonight. As you all know, my husband recently passed and, well... At this point, Amelia begins to tear up, theatrically on stage, so much so that her makeup begins to smear, and she produces a handkerchief to dry her eyes while continuing. Well, I'm very upset. I miss my poor William very much, and I don't know what I'll do without him. And that's why I've brought you all here tonight. I hope you can find some use for his collection, and I know that he would be very happy to see his things go to those who value them highly. I hope that you show this poor widow a kindness by finding something you like. But now, let us begin. I'll leave the auctioning to Mr. Warren. With her opening statement made, she moves to stage left and allows a bespectacled old man, presumably Mr. Warren, to take center stage. He clears his throat before speaking. Tonight we have 6 very ancient and very valuable items for sale from the estate of Professor William Harris. Though exceedingly strange, I have deemed the items to be authentic to the best of my ability. On each table, I have placed a ballot box next to the item for sale. If you wish to bid on an item, simply write your name and the amount you are willing to pay for it, and then place the slip in the box. The item will be sold to the highest bidder. All of the proceeds will go to the wife of the deceased." With that, Mr. Warren moves to the gathered items. Mr. Warren approaches the first table and removes the cloth covering to reveal an odd pair of clay cylinders with strange etchings on their sides. They are small and seem quite fragile, with large cracks running down the sides. Mr. Warren proceeds to the next table and likewise uncovers the item in question. This item is significantly larger and more ornate. It appears to be some sort of altar or reliquary, decorated heavily with yellow-green gemstones. However, there was one similarity with the first item, and it was the presence of the strange written characters, though the ones on this altar seem to have been painted on. Mr. Warren turns to the next item in question and displays it for all to see. A heavily decorated crown of solid bronze, wrought in the image of a Hindu god. The next item is certainly the most mundane, a large, thick, leather-bound journal that appeared well-worn and beaten, with several loose papers jammed between the pages. Mr. Warren senses the confusion of some of the assembled, and he clarifies that the notebook is the assembled personal works and studies of Professor Harris. What follows is a well-preserved ceremonial robe of a Brahmin priest. The cloak is pure white. The last item is perhaps the strangest of all. It is a small statue or idol, presumably of one of the infinite many deities of ancient India. It is made from blue-green stone in the shape of a rather grotesque lizard or serpent, and the craftsmanship is crude and gaudy, so much so that it appears fake. People begin moving among the items, looking them over and conversing quietly. You examine the items with a trained eye. The crown and ceremonial robe are obviously authentic, and seem fairly typical of what you would expect. They were in great condition and would certainly fetch a good price, though they were no rarer than any other antiquity. Likewise, Professor Harris's journal seems like it would be of value to a scholar, though a few delicate cursory page turns show that it contains personal accounts and travel logs, as well as historically relevant information. This is likely a good source of information on Professor Harris himself. However, the other items present are noticeably different. The altar and clay cylinders bear a similar script, and the signs of wear and aging present on them. Given this, they are unlikely to be fabrications, but they do appear unlike more traditional findings from ancient India. A close inspection of the lizard idol leads you to believe it is likewise verifiably authentic. Though the workmanship is strange and unnatural, and clearly unlike anything else you've seen from ancient India, or anywhere else for that matter, it does not bear any signs of work from modern tools or styles either. You notice that you are not the only one looking over the items with such interest. The monk appears to be closely scrutinizing the stranger items as well, and the dark-suited gentleman from earlier appear to have taken a liking to the curious idol. Apart from this, various other guests wander amidst the items, occasionally fixating on one in particular. There are many guests, and a fair number of bids being placed. You feel that the information in the journal is essential to your interests, and you cannot help but make a bid. You place your paper with the others and hope that Mr. Warren calls your name when the amounts are compared. You feel that the knowledge in these pages could very well prove essential to you, so you offer a price that is a bit more than fair. Sure enough, Mr. Warren calls your name and presses the leather-bound tome into your eager hands. Something draws you to the curious idol, and you feel compelled to make a bid. You notice that you are not alone in this, as the monk and one of the dark-suited men both place bids in the box. You hope yours is high enough. Clearly none of the others expected anyone to pay such a ludicrous price for the crude idol. You still can't believe how much money you offered for it. But the grotesque and misshapen thing is now yours. The monk and the men in the dark suits seem to be staring daggers at you, but nobody else seems to mind or take much notice beyond a few raised eyebrows that anyone would pay such an excessive amount for such a trifling and outlandish thing. Still, when you look Amelia's way, you can tell she is quite pleased. Your business here is completed. You see the crowd staring covetously at the newly acquired items, and you happen to spot Amelia looking smug and satisfied with a leather bag full of cash. Mr. Warren is beginning to clear away the tables, and Officer Powell stands by the door and directs people out of the building and into the ever-thickening fog. Though you seem content to stay and socialize, you feel it would be best to bed down for the night. While the estate sale still seems interesting, you would feel more secure with a roof over your head for the night. You pull someone out of the crowd and inquire where you can find a room for the night. "Hey buddy, where'd be a good place to bunk down for the night? Looking for a place to stay."
"Why, if you go a few blocks down that way and take a right, you'll find a pretty good place."
Following the gentleman's directions, you find a modestly priced motel a few buildings down from what is apparently the police station. As you enter in, out of the cool night air, you are greeted by the warmth of a burning fireplace. The small front room feels stuffy and cramped. The bulk of the space is dominated by the large service counter, behind which sits a wiry-looking wisp of a woman. She turns her wide eyes to you and asks your name.
"And what would your name be?"
"I am Professor Bancroft. I was a colleague of the late professor, and here on university business. I'm just looking to get a room for the night."
"Very well. It's going to be $5 for the night, and you get a complimentary breakfast."
With the transaction complete, you haul your thin briefcase up the stairs, unpack it, and settle into your room for the night. That is the end of Chapter 1. Stay tuned until next time for Chapter 2, and see what kind of hidden secrets Professor Bancroft uncovers about the newly acquired journal of the late professor and the strange idol